Mukesh Ambani. He is obviously known for his laser sharp vision, like you said, being extremely outcome, oriented. But what would be that one leadership lesson that you've learned from him that perhaps people from outside don't know?
You can't even imagine the speed at which he reads, learns, adopts, responds, influences, and acts. It's unimaginable. It's immense. We don't believe in competing. If we were to start with the thought of competing, then we would let competition drive our strategy. If there was no Geo, or we hadn't transformed this industry and we had had COVID upon us, 1.4 billion people in this country did not panic, did not disrupt anything, did not break down anything. There were no riots for food, etc., was because people had that information in their hands every day and they knew what was happening in the world. Both these brands failed to change in time to attract developers, to attract customers. I think both the brands stopped innovating.
So good evening and welcome to yet another edition of Thinkly Talks. We are in conversation with Sunil Dutt, a telecom veteran with over 30 years of experience. Sunil has led mobile and tech businesses at Reliance Jio, Blackberry, HP, Samsung, and Nokia. And he's really driven major growth across India and the Asia markets. So with that really brief introduction, welcome to the talk, Sunil. Great to have you
here. Thank you. Thank you so much, Vivek. Yeah. Good to be here.
Yeah, likewise. And, there's just so much to unpack with you today evening. I mean, you like we were discussing before the talk, you've been literally through 2-3 generations of the telecom revolution. And I really hope we can kind of cover all of that, right? But I think one thing that really comes across, Sunil, when you think about it, is that, you've held leadership roles in companies that have fundamentally disrupted industries. And in some cases, they've themselves been disrupted. So did you really actively seek out such category of companies, or did disruption just happen to find you?
I would say, Vivek, while the environment that I had at various organizations, that definitely shaped that whole disruption. But I also would like to add that, one needs to have a natural flair or a mindset,
right,
and willingness to adopt and learn and influence and ride disruption.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you get disrupted yourself. And whether I sought disruption, yes, I did seek it out. And I think that is something that kept my journey so fulfilling and so happy.
When you kind of got into telecom 30 years back, 35 years back, did you feel that you will see so many waves coming up so quickly, one after another, or did it also surprise you at the rate of change that was happening?
Well, I think, honestly speaking, in the beginning, in the first few years, one doesn't realize that. But then, when it starts to hit you faster, because, 2 decades ago, I mean, there was a lot of innovation in this industry and it was constant.
Right.
So you're always prepared for it. However, if you were to look at the last decade, the speed at which the innovation is happening, disruption is happening, changes are happening, you really need to be on your toes now, because and you people who claim to have crystal balls 5 years out, they need to break them, because there's so much changes and so rapidly.
And you talked about this whole thing about having a disruptor's mindset. Like, it's very important to have that. And I think especially now, right, with so much happening, like you rightly said, like you can't even gaze 5 years into the future with any level of certainty. When you look at the geopolitics that's happening outside, when you look at the working condition, we just about recovering from the pandemic, and now you have this whole AI that's coming in, right? It's very important for somebody to kind of try and build up this kind of a disruptor's mindset. Do you think that is this something that can be acquired, or is this something that you're simply born with?
No, I think this is something which you can acquire also. And one, as I said, one has a natural flair for it. But I think, yes, these are skill sets, or these are things that you can acquire, and you need to work on it. And there is enough and more, knowledge which is available, enough and more knowledge articles, and enough and more data which is available to be able to aid that, to support all of that.
Right. So just kind of segueing away towards Samsung, that's where you spend some time. You really built Samsung from scratch, and you turned it into this giant market leader. I believe Samsung still continues to rule the roost when it comes to India. So But I think at that time there were a lot of things which were probably not necessarily in its favor, right? Because there was Nokia, which was the dominant player. There was obviously the early thing of iPhone, but which obviously was never a mass product, but still, and trying to really convince Indians to kind of trust a Korean brand, right? Could you kind of just share us, some parts of the story and tell us what were the turning points that made Indians really trust a Korean brand like that?
Yeah, see, I would say, insofar as Korean brands were concerned, there wasn't any apprehensions in the minds of the consumers. That was a little earlier than that. But I think Samsung, LG, and some of the other companies had started to gain a little bit of trust in the minds of the consumers. However, from a mobility perspective, from mobile devices perspective, Samsung was holding about 1.7% share of the market when I joined.
Mhm.
And I had come from Nokia, which I had taken up to 80% share of the market.
Wow.
And so it was that was the situation. So I think the first thing that I had to do was to really build the confidence in the team.
Right.
And I had to bring them to focus completely on the customer and the customer preferences and the customer requirement, and not on competition. Because the moment you looked at competition, you had this giant which was standing in front of you.
Right.
But the moment you looked at the customer, you knew what was your work which was cut out.
Right.
And then it was about working with the product teams to bring the relevant products that would meet and maybe even exceed the needs of the customers at that price, at that point of time, at the right price points. When I say right price points, I'm not talking about cheap price points or cheaper price points, but I'm talking about the right price points.
Right.
And what helped was, there was a very proactive product organization in Korean headquarters at Seoul. That helped immensely. They were very focused on making India a success. And the speed of execution was also pretty good. So Samsung not only brought, what I would say the relevant products, but also futuristic products. So for example, Samsung in India was the first one to introduce the touchscreen phones. Samsung was quick to adopt, dual SIM feature phones.
Right.
And a whole lot of other products which Samsung kept bringing, and also was developing the whole ecosystem going along. So Samsung was quick on, nimble on its feet in terms of doing that. And while we did that, the next step that we had, or the next task we had in front of us, was to build a very strong brand positioning.
Mhm.
And this is a product for young people. We had to address the younger audience. And that is when, the whole campaign about next is what, that positioning
Yeah.
came up,
Mhm.
which worked very well with the younger customers,
Right.
because they were always looking for more from their devices.
Right.
So while the products delivered the next in technology, we helped with the positioning, personal positioning of next with technology for the younger audience.
Mhm.
While all this was happening, we also built a very strong and a differentiated channel,
Mhm.
a go-to-market channel, and that helped us to scale the business very, very rapidly. Within the first 18 months, we had touched about roughly about 18% market share.
Mhm.
And after that, Samsung kept growing. I had moved on from Samsung after that, after 2 years, but
Right.
Samsung kept growing, and at one point of time, it hit even a 40% share of the market.
Wow. I mean, these are some insane numbers, right? You're talking about 80% for Nokia, 40% for Samsung. I mean, that's literally working in the luxury of monopoly, right? In that sense, right? Yeah. But I'm very tempted to ask. We all remember the Nexus What campaign, and it definitely captured the imagination, because people always were expecting something new to happen. But
Yeah.
if we were to just do a little, just indulge me. I mean, if you just were to do a little bit of crystal ball gazing right now, what do you think is the next is what for mobile phones? I mean, there's just so much that's happened, but at some levels it's remained the same, And have you ever thought about it?
Yeah, so I think next is what for mobile devices is not just about the hardware.
Mhm.
Now it is about the entire ecosystem.
Right.
Now it is about bringing in the entire app ecosystem, supported with the AI tools which are now coming in. So it's not
Right.
no longer about the megapixels of the camera. It is about the
Right.
experience that a camera delivers. It is no longer about the chipset. It is about the speed which the chipset will deliver for maybe my gaming, or maybe my uh, my healthcare apps, or my fintech apps, or other information, or my education related material. So it's going to be the future is going to be defined by that, about what the experience or the value which the device delivers. It's not, I mean, hardware will play a role in it. Hardware will have to support all of that, but
Right.
it's going to be more about what device will deliver as an experience. I'll give you an example. I mean, you have feature phones. You've got these button phones, feature phones, which is still 200 million people who are using those kind of phones.
Right.
So when we introduced this phone at Geo, we did not introduce a plain feature phone which could do only voice and SMS, which
Mm-hmm.
most of the 2G feature phones are doing. We've introduced a feature phone at 699 rupees price point, which enables a customer to watch 455 live TV channels, watch a lot of video content, which is live video content. People are able to watch cricket matches, including IPL nowadays on that. And you can do UPI transactions with it. You can send, receive money on it. You can do geo chat on it. So it's about providing that value which is going to make a difference rather than just the hardware.
No, I agree. I mean, I think right now what we're expecting, especially on the AI stuff, with the agents and, the kind of the Apple intelligence, like the way, Apple talks about it. We're definitely in for some very exciting time. But yeah, it's always interesting to kind of think about, okay, what could it be? We almost have so much of the best of the best. But you talked about Geo, and I think one thing about Geo is it's always been what should I say, the beacon for innovation, especially when it comes to mass play. I mean, like I was sharing with you during my early days at Microsoft, in 2002 is when I'd kind of, worked closely with Reliance. And at that time, Reliance had launched, even at that time, I think a 500 rupee phone, if I'm the LG and the Samsung, or
Yes.
which had kind of bundled in with those plans, right? And the
Yes.
features of that really blew people's mind, right? I mean, could you just kind of help us understand how does Reliance think about innovation? Because whenever it's done, whether it's on the hardware side, then you're talking about, obviously, when you talk about your pricing strategies, which shook the entire market right now when it came in. And now again, you're back at the feature phone. I mean, you're not ignoring the feature phone. It's a 200 million, large population, right? So just help us understand really, how does really innovation work at Geo?
A few things which Reliance as an organization is known for. For example, and when I talk about Geo, so for example, uh, we've been focused on the next gen of the digital ecosystems. And this is driven by a very high amount of agility, very high amount of market driven disruptive solutions. And this is done, for customers cutting across segments: age, gender, income, professions. The speed of R&D, the speed of developing those innovative solutions is unmatched. I mean,
Mm,
and very high speed of adapting to changing environment.
mm,
And again, our strategy is more to do with customer centricity. What is it that the customer is looking for? How do we differentiate? For example, when we came in, uh, there were all these 2G and 3G networks, and people were paying something like 250 rupees for 1 GB of data,
mhm,
and that too poor quality. But instead of acquiring other operators and giving them more of the same, uh, and you would know Mr. Mukesh Ambani. I mean, he's very clear that you need to build something which provides a differentiated value for our customers, and which we are able to scale, which is relevant to all Indians. So the founder chairman's direction and philosophy was very clear. What is good for India is good for Reliance, and I think we live
right,
it every day.
right.
So for us, innovation is all about customer centricity, and we are able to deliver on that. And again, we will never let competition sort of drive our objectives or our strategy. We do what our customers are looking for.
So I think you're never limited, let's say, by the category per se or by what the incumbents are doing. It's about how you perceive the size of the market is, or the way you could unlock the value in the market.
Absolutely, because when we started off with this whole launch of 4G and now with 5G,
Hmm.
people were thinking that, okay, and I know for a fact because a lot of people from competition joined us, but so how they were thinking, and people never thought that we would be able to scale it up at the speed at which we've done. But
Right.
then when you provide them with new kind of a solution, and you help customers look at something which is very, very differentiated, which provides them with a lot of value, which they can unlock for themselves and what they can do with that.
Mm.
And you support that with the right kind of technology platform, and you are able to scale it up. And it's no wonder that our first 100 million customers joined us in 170 days. And after
Wow.
that, up to 450 million customers has been a record journey. And to the time that, we are the largest mobile broadband data company in the world now.
Wow. That's amazing. But to the level that you could share with us, Sunil, I'm sure that when you would have thought about a market entry with Geo, and you really thought about how to kind of break in some ways you could say the duopoly of Vodafone and Airtel, right? I mean, and these are not small companies. We're talking about companies with pretty large balance sheets, especially Vodafone, with access to global markets, their experience in so many parts of the world, right? uh, the price would have been a very, what should I say? I mean, it almost seems like now in hindsight, of course, it looks like it worked out, but it would have seemed like a very risky bet at that time, right? Trying to take them on, the incumbents, on the premise of price. Of course, there's a lot of value that you did, but I think the price point that you kind of brought that to was the real disruptor. So anything that you could share with us about the thoughts at that time, about the risks that you knew that were happening, and the fact that people thought that this would only lead to a bloodbath and kind of suck the profitability out of the ecosystem at that point in time, right? So
Yeah. So Vivek, first and foremost, when you do, a few $1 billion of investment, you already uh, thought through all the risk factors. You've thought through, debated, discussed all kinds of uh, things that could go wrong. And
mm,
when we make our strategy, any kind of strategy, even a smaller strategies that we do for maybe a product or a channel or anything, the first thing that we, after we have written it down, is we say that this is going to fail.
right.
And if it
Okay.
is going to fail, how is it? What is my next plan of action? What is my subsequent plan of action? So
Right.
that is how we work on.
Right.
And then the other thing that we do is we are outcome driven. We define our outcome that we are going to drive 3 years out, 5 years out, and then we work backwards from that. So when we were working towards our first launch, it was also about meeting a lot of unmet desires of large youth population of this country.
Mm,
We are a young country.
right.
So always everybody is saying we are a young country. But what are we
Mhm.
doing for fulfilling those unmet demands or the needs of those young customers? There was a huge desire and a need amongst those people to connect to the rest of the world so that they could change their own lives. So
Right.
here was a young population, here was an entrepreneurial spirit, here was a hunger to succeed, a hunger to grow, but unconnected, even to
Mm,
the basic level of internet, paying 250 rupees per GB for poor quality and hardly available 3G networks. I
right.
mean, they were feeling cheated, they were feeling fleeced. So what we had to do was to provide them with a solution for their huge need for that spirit of entrepreneurship to get unlocked,
Right.
or even for any other growth to get unlocked. So when we provided them with this platform, starting with 4G and now 5G, and help them to connect up digitally to the rest of the world, they, the kind of potential that got unlocked, and you've seen in the last 10 years, whether you see the
Right.
startup ecosystem, whether you see the other industries, whether you see the basic infrastructure, the way it is growing is
Right.
because of that connectivity or the benefit that that connectivity brought to those people. And
Mm,
it's not that the customers were paying us lower. than what they were paying the others. In fact, the customers were starting to pay us higher.
Right.
The only thing that we did was we were not charging them for voice, which
Mm.
which other competitors were.
Right.
We charged them for data, and we gave them at 150 rupees starting point, and then going up to higher price point. We gave them data which was unimaginable. For 150 rupees, people had 42 GB of data in a month, 1.5 gig per day, and people suddenly saw what they could do with that. And today, before we came in, people used to consume something like 450 MB of data in a month on an average.
Yeah.
Today, yeah, I mean, today the consumer is consuming 30 GB of data per month.
Right. Right.
So that is because of the kind of value which people are seeing. So
Right.
whether it's to do with their profession, whether it's work, whether it is their business, whether it is education, whether it is other tools, information, or just entertainment also. So a
Right.
whole lot has changed because of that.
Right. Right. No, absolutely. And I think sometimes, we kind of talk that, what would have happened had Jio not entered the industry? I mean, we would probably be like some of the European countries paying extremely high for data. Like for example, every time you travel outside of India, right, you are amazed what the cost structure is outside, right? And the
Yes.
fact that it's not only about, like you rightly said, about cheap, it's about probably being best in the world. The QoS is extremely high. That when you are on let's say the Indian network, right? So that's amazing. And then of course unlocking values on, let's say you talked about
Yeah.
stuff like OTT that's come in. When you look at the whole surround, you look at the startup entrepreneurship. In fact, even the friends like in Google and all, they're talking about the data centers getting relocated here, which was never happening initially because of the fringe never had the data, right? I mean, the bandwidth
Correct.
was never enabled, right? So
Yeah.
it's really fascinating the way the game has changed, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
so we're all glad Geo
I'll
happened.
just I'll
Yeah,
interrupt you for a minute over there, Vivek. You just mentioned about if Geo had not come in, what would have happened?
right,
Uh, so the impact on all the industries you just spoke about. But I would say, imagine what would have happened if there was no Geo, or we hadn't transformed this industry and we had had COVID upon us.
right.
The fact
Absolutely.
that 1.4 billion people in this country did not panic,
Hmm.
did not disrupt anything, did not break down anything, there were no riots for food, etc., was because people had that information in their
Right.
hands every day, and they knew what was happening in the world. So they knew it was
Absolutely.
not just they who were impacted, or their village, or their town, or the society, housing society which was impacted. It was the
Right.
world which was impacted.
Right.
So that calm prevailed, that sense prevailed, and we came out of it, you know, uh,
Yeah.
and we came out quite well out of that.
Right. No, I think that's a great point, and especially so if you were to think about it, the two big events that happened. Let's say the one that happened in 2016, the demonetization. And look at the chaos that ensued there. And then, the same thing when it happened in 2020. I mean, you obviously had, everything had gone digital. There were no lines at ATM. Transactions are happening. The food delivery, when it restarted, was all happening fine, right? I mean, I'm sure tomorrow there's a demon, it won't impact the common man at all, because the whole digital stack has become so mature in the country, on
Yes.
the back of bandwidth, on the back of the UPI, the India stack, right? I mean, that's a fascinating story as to how we really have truly gone digital, right? And I think the underpinning of all of that, of course, is great data, right? And that's been the change. Yeah,
Yeah.
fascinating. But before Jio, of course, and of course, working for a dominant player like Nokia, I think you did go across to BlackBerry, and after Samsung, right? And I mean, what was really the learning? I mean, because you did see eventually we saw Nokia kind of collapse, and even later on, the BlackBerry went the same thing, right? I mean, and these both were dominant players at that time, right? So,
Yeah.
what are the learning from these experiences, to you when you think back and reflect?
Yeah, when I look back, I think, and honestly, I mean, both were very, very strong brands in their own time. Uh,
Right.
Nokia was generic to mobile phones at one point of time, and BlackBerry was generic to everything which was smartphones and and
Email
enterprise.
and mobiles, it was
Yeah,
synonymous with that. Right.
yeah. So, and both had very, very strong positions. But and from there, both of them, lost that positioning. I think most important learning I would say would be, you need to keep your eyes and ears close to the ground for what are the changing trends which are happening amongst the consumers. What are the changing preferences, and how consumers are adopting that change. I think both the brands, had that as their strength at one point of time, and for both of them, it became the biggest weakness also because they went on holding on to their legacy hardware
Mhm.
while consumers were moving towards touch phones and other devices. They were holding on to their legacy operating systems while consumers were, and the developing community, more importantly, was moving elsewhere, and they kept holding on to that. Uh, Another thing I would say is when you're big, you still need to be nimble footed. And you can't say that's the elephant dancing. Sometimes continued success over a period of time leads to complacency. And I would dare say it also leads to arrogance.
Right.
And that's the first step towards the decline. For example, look at us at Jio. Today we are the largest mobile broadband data company in the world.
Right.
Yet we work every day like a startup. Every day we are focused like that. Smartphone industry was and now is, completely reliant on an ecosystem. It's not just hardware. It's an ecosystem of apps. It's the ecosystem of services. And I think both these brands failed to change in time to attract developers, to attract customers. I think in summary, if I was to say it, I think both the brands stopped innovating
Right.
and both the brands stopped listening to the consumers or even recognizing the trends from the consumers. I think that is what led to the downfall. I mean, it's putting it simplistically, but
Not sure.
directionally, I think it was like that.
Yeah. I remember there was a colleague of mine who was with Nokia, and I met her at an MBA reunion, and I was telling her that I said she was with Nokia, and I was like, I think you guys are making some great phones, but what do you think about the touch phones that are coming in? She said, yeah, but we don't think so. That's an important category to worry about, at this point in time, and so, and of course at that time it didn't look like that because iPhone was prohibitively expensive. The
Yeah,
Android, I don't think so, it really happened in a big way. The only other touch phone was this very clunky, Windows-based phones, which and I think they, like you said, the arrogance kind of, or should I say, the complexity had probably seeped through the organization, and they didn't think that this would really be the change. So I think
yeah,
great point. There's a few questions here from the audience, and I'm just trying, kind of, combine them. So there's Varda and Rahul and Advait, who's just talking about, so they're just trying to say, I'm just trying, combine the question. It says, you talked about the startup culture at Jio, so, how is it, how important is it for you as a leader to ensure that you're really communicating, this whole, the paranoia that's really required, because as a startup, you're always working with this kind of urgency, and never have the complexity. You don't think that you're sitting with infinite resources. You're actually very frugal, about how you kind of look at that, right? So that, and similarly, if you can kind of lead that too. So therefore, what do you think is the right quality of a leader? What are you currently doing, and therefore, what would you be the right quality that the next generation of leaders need to have to kind of, be able to succeed in such a complex world?
yeah. Several. You have to have several qualities. I would say, as a leader in this kind of a rapidly changing environment, wherein uh, you have to act like a startup. And when I'm saying we act like a startup, I'm not making a generalized statement. I mean, we do it every day.
Right.
Uh, because what we do is we are looking at data at every hour.
Mhm.
For us today, if it in any part of this country, a consumer buys and on is getting onboarded as a Geo customer with a Geo SIM card, we know it instantly. So we have this one hop connectivity with the last mile retail outlet. So we have that information with us. So when we have this kind of data and at that speed available to us, it helps us to take a lot of actions and recognize what is happening in the market at a much higher speed than it would have been possible a few years ago. But having data is not enough. I think what is important is for any leader, when you got the data, when you know what is to be done with that data, one, uh, you need to have that adaptability. You need to have that agility, that speed. As leaders, people need to have that digital literacy and understanding of technology. Even if you're not an engineer, but understanding of technology and what the technology can do for you is very, very important.
Right.
You need to have an approach which is completely oriented towards solutions. There is going to be a world full of problems. Are you the solution in that? So that is something which has to be a part of your mindset. Uh, how do you manage this whole startup eco culture? Very effective communication and collaboration with people. So you need to be able to communicate literally every day, if not every hour, with your people in terms of what is happening in the industry, what is happening with technology, how is it that is going to impact us, how do we take it forward, build a sense of that growth focus. Because if you're not a growth company, then then decline is inevitable. How do you constantly keep innovating your products? And when I say products, it's not just about innovating products, it's about also innovating your go-to-market strategies. It's about innovating on your marketing strategies. It is about continuous learning. It is about continuous focus on, as I mentioned earlier, outcomes. And one word I would say for all leaders in this kind of a changing, rapid environment is having a lot of resilience, because there will be times you'll get kicked in your teeth, and you will. I mean, it's inevitable. But if you have resilience as a leader, you'll be able to take your team forward and guide them out of that.
Right. No, great answer. And I think you kind of really covered some of the questions that Rahul, Advait, and Siddharth had about the complexity, the changing time, the competition, and everything, right? And just on that point, what would be your keep awakes at night, Sunil? You obviously are working on full steam. You're evolving all the time, but what really would be the thing that would nag you, bother you?
What nags me or what keep me awake at night is, what is it that a customer is going to be expecting tomorrow, next week, next month? How is technology going to disrupt that? Who's going to develop something else in this world which will suddenly come and change, everything?
Right.
So, how do I keep getting more and more knowledge about that from different sources? How do I develop those sources which enable me that something happening in technology, something happening on the regulatory front, something happening in the fashion front, something happening on materials front, something happening on supply chain front? What is it that is happening everywhere, and how can it have an impact on me? So what is that? If I were to take yesterday's example, what is the Trump moment for me as to what he is going to do, which is going to impact the country? So if somebody is going to be looking at that, I need to be looking at it on a daily basis to figure out, what is going to happen in that environment overall, which can impact my customer's experience.
So I would imagine a lot.
Sorry, even in terms of my communication and the marketing tools, what is happening in that, in terms of digital connectivity getting better? Am I more relevant for mass marketing, or am I more relevant now for a very focused digital marketing and community marketing? So a whole lot of that, it's these things do keep you awake.
Fascinating, and we talked about leadership, in the previous question, and really that brings me really to, Mr. Mukesh Ambani, right? I mean, he's obviously known for his laser sharp vision, like you said, being extremely outcome, oriented. Uh, Reliance is known for some amazing project management. I mean, like somebody said, we don't think of ourselves as an ongoing company. We just kind of keep breaking down into projects and we kind of keep jumping from one to another, right? I mean, these are what some of the years say that, we know. But what would be that one leadership lesson that you've learned from him that perhaps people from outside don't know, since you work with him so intimately?
So, any one thing is difficult to say, because
Okay, no, please, we would love
yeah,
to get your insights.
as a person, I mean, you can't even imagine the speed at which he reads, learns, adopts, responds, influences, and acts. It's unimaginable. It's immense. And the knowledge of each and every industry in which Reliance is, or which the ecosystem would get impacted, everything related to it, as a deep insight, is something that outside world may not know, but he is completely 100% on top of it. And the other thing about him is his ability to encourage people to take risks, even if they fail. The amount of support that he gives to people to take risks, to learn and succeed from that, and supporting them to the hilt while providing them with speed, flexibility of decisions, and all resources. That is something which outside world sometime may not know, because when he's interacting with the outside world, you'll perceive him to be so calm and so
Yes.
Coming out like that, but he is internally that kind of a person, and it's a delight to be able to work with. I mean, I've worked with global leaders.
Right.
I haven't ever come across a leader who works like this. And the one other thing which I would fail if I was not to point that out, uh, wherein he lives this every day of continuously reminding everybody of one mantra, which is family first and health first.
Nice.
And honestly, we inside the organization, we experience it. I've personally experienced it. So I'm talking from my personal experience.
Nice. I think, putting humans first, really, I mean, that has to be the thing to be able to attract talent of that level, right? In the long run. Yeah. There's a lovely question here from Siddharth, and I'll just kind of expand on that. So the question is, you've talked about Reliance moving extremely fast. You're saying like, whether it's in telecom, retail, or media, we've seen that happening time and time again. Is the decision making really, top down? Or is it through layers of, very bottom up, quick feedback, and then comes down, or people at the end are really empowered? And more importantly, is the decision making led by data, instinct, or some kind of a debate?
I'll start with that first. I think it's data and debate, and instinct also requires data and debate to keep getting better.
Right.
Uh, you cannot dispute the fact that the vision and the foresight, maybe 5 years out, 10 years out, which Mr. Ambani or Mr. Modi would have,
Right.
is something which maybe some of us would not have. But the fact that they are able to discuss that, debate that, build data around it to be able to build uh, build on the decision making, is something the way we work. So it's not about top down. It's about, if you do not agree with him and you're able to show him why with data or with logic, he is not a person who sticks around with his own decisions. The moment he's convinced that somebody else is showing him the right decision, which may not be in agreement with him,
Right.
he gives you that freedom to say, yeah, okay, then go ahead, do it, and he'll support you for it. So it's not top down. It's about debate. It's about data. It's about discussions. It's about course corrections. You take the decisions. You move forward. You need to course correct. You course correct.
So I think it's the willingness to be able to even, walk back if you made the wrong decision, right? Because rather
Yes,
than just being, stuck up on, let's say, an incorrect, point of view in that sense.
absolutely, absolutely.
I think the more you read about, some of the great leaders, I think that's probably one of the biggest, what should I say, a highlight of theirs, right? Because like
Yes,
there's an investor who says, I forget his name, but he said, like, invest, then investigate. Just because you've taken a call to invest doesn't mean you have to just keep doubling down, and then you keep
correct.
further investigating that I need to kind of pull back, from that, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And on any new project also, he keeps up with you. You might sometimes feel that it's micromanaging, but no, he keeps up with you till the time he's convinced that your bullet train is on the track.
Right.
After that, he says, now you're on your own. Just come to me in case you need any help.
So, that brings, us to a very important part of it. I mean, which is really about reliance and competition, because I'm sure that, the moment Reliance announces it's entering a new vertical, I'm sure the competition out there literally starts panicking. They obviously start coming up with, their own war plans as to how to kind of, take on somebody who's especially so focused. Like, I mean, we've seen that happening, when it moved into retail, that multiple false starts. And now they've obviously kind of got the act right. You've seen two, versions of their attempt at telecom, and they have absolutely got Geo right. And now even in entertainment, right? But I would just love to get your insight as to, how do you really think about competition? I mean, do or for example, one is about incumbent. The second is, let's say, when you see a startup which is coming up in that space. I mean, do you see them as an opportunity to kind of partner, or do you start thinking of them as an acquisition target, or do you start thinking about how do you just kind of, overwhelm them, in a polite way?
No, no, no. No. One, we don't believe in competing, because if we were to start with the thought of competing, then we would let competition, drive our strategy. We don't believe in that. We
Right.
work towards excellence in whatever we want to do.
Mhm.
So we believe in working with data. We believe in working with speed, with diligence for our growth, and we believe that if we are able to provide the right kind of solutions for the customers, for our whether the customer is an end consumer or a B2B consumer, if we are able to provide the right kind of solutions, right kind of products for these customers, we support them with right kind of technology platforms. We are closer to the customers in terms of our execution, in terms of our go-to-market, and in terms of our communication, and we are focused on scale. Then the growth comes to us more rapidly than some of the other organizations at times. So really, and we don't look at startups as a competition. In fact, we support startups.
Yeah.
We believe in supporting startups because we feel that a good startup can actually play a lot of role in developing the overall industry.
Right.
And so yeah, we support them. We don't really see them as a competition.
And of course, Jio and Reliance have over the last few years built a very strong, which was a bench strength of startups that you've been incubating, working, acquiring, So I think the whole, 9 yards in terms of the startup ecosystem, right? Because I think,
Yes.
in fact, I think the whole idea of acquisition also, I mean, it's actually a great thing because, I think a lot of time you see, startups, they're just stuck. The founders are stuck with the companies without getting that exit. And you really need, what you have in the US is these large giants who kind of keep picking up, acquiring, the tech giants like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
And I think it'll be actually great. So I think it's not really a problem. It's actually a good thing to happen,
Yeah.
the more you kind of work with them, right?
Yeah.
I think, before we kind of move towards, the close of this, there's a few questions that put together by the team, rapid fire. I'll just kind of ask you and would just love your response on that, right? Yeah. So I'll just kind of get on with it. So, Sunil, what's the last movie or show that you've really binge watched?
I don't recall the movie. I've been watching shows. I've been watching some TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because I like shows which are full of good language.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I somehow don't like the crass language which some of the shows have. I like shows which have good language, which have good amount of humor and wit and intelligence, and which are quick. So even if some of these were old shows which were produced much earlier, but because of the whole digital connectivity, I'm able to watch them now. So the ones which I've really enjoyed in the last maybe 2-3 years have been White Collar. I recall as one, Suits. I recall as the
Mm-hmm.
other
Of
one.
course.
NCIS is one which I recall the other one. So I think these are the shows which
Right.
I've kind of watched and I've kind of liked. Movies, I don't really recall too many of them because I think I just forget which movie I watched.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think with movies, especially, just it's more like just surfing through the television, just catching whatever is on. At least that's what I do.
Yeah,
In that sense. Um, so tell me, what's the fastest way for someone at Reliance in your team to get fired?
to get fired.
Yeah.
Uh, Top of the list would be unethical behavior,
Mhm.
uh, any sort of a misconduct, uh, persistent negligence would be the other one. Uh, because we believe in supporting people, and we set for ourselves targets which we know sometimes are unachievable,
Mm.
but we don't fire anybody for that, so long as we are convinced that people have put in the right kind of effort and they are putting in the right kind of mind behind it and the right kind of resources and energy behind it. So long as
Right.
that is happening and is happening honestly, we don't need to remove anybody. But on some of these 2-3 things that I spoke about, absolutely no compromise.
It's great to be very clear, where you draw the line. So I think that unambiguity is
Yes.
always good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if you could have dinner with any tech icon, dead or alive, who would that be?
Alive. And I'm very clear on that. And given any chance, even though we interact with him, I would have it with Mr. Mukesh Ambani again. I know some people will say, why not Elon Musk or Satya or Tim but no, for me, it's him. And
Amazing.
it's because one, you would learn so much from him on everything, including technology, and you would learn so much from him on the overall life
Right.
and overall environment. So for me, if I was to have that opportunity, it's going to be with him. And I'm assuming you're saying one-on-one.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
I,
absolutely.
I don't, the more I'm listening to you, I really think that, we need to do a better job of packaging the stories of our icons, because I think there is just so much of that happens, management that happens, in the Western world, in the Silicon Valley, but I think we have some amazing stories, like,
Oh, yes.
and we just haven't really, because a lot of them just prefer to be under the radar, you know. Whether you look at Mr. Ratan Tata, whether you look at Mr. Ambani, some of the big names, they just prefer to be below the radar, right? And I think that's probably the Indian style of management, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to look at these leaders and the way that they look at our country, the way they want to change this country,
Yeah,
you get so much of sense of pride and happiness inside that here
amazing.
is someone who is working towards that last Indian, and he's saying every Indian should have access to information, to
Right.
internet, to technology. Every Indian should have that, so that every Indian has the capability to be
Yeah,
able to change his or her own life.
absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
you have to be with these people to be able to understand that.
Completely agree. Yeah. Okay. So if you were to switch jobs with anyone for a day, who would that be?
Maybe maybe my teacher who taught me, or maybe a general in the armed forces.
Okay, nice, nice. Was that a career choice that you would have probably made in another lifetime?
Yes.
Right. Actually, I thought you'll say Mr. Mukesh Ambani, which is why I kind of laughed, like, but I thought, but yeah. And why teacher? You've always, what was any subject or Something that you were really, attached
No, I would.
to?
No, it's because a teacher is the one who, is the first one to start influencing the thinking or
That's
building and developing thinking in people. So it's
that's
from
true.
that point of view. It's not from the point of view of any subject matter, but from the point of view of developing people, and their thinking abilities.
Right.
I think from that standpoint.
Right. I think the nation is built by its teachers, right? And I think
Yes.
some of us who have been really lucky to have, one of the inspiring ones come our way. I think we are truly blessed. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely.
Uh, Coffee or chai? What's your go-to drink in the middle of the day?
Whatever is conveniently available. I think right now,
Okay.
right now I have a cup of coffee with me, but
Okay.
I'm okay with either of them. A good cup of tea or a good cup of coffee.
Okay. Great. And what's the one thing that you miss about the pre-smartphone era?
Spending face-to-face time with family, friends,
Right.
and actually enjoying and experiencing the moments.
Right.
And building those memories rather than building them in your mind and in your heart rather than on a cloud storage.
Mm.
And one comes across so many of these things in real life as well.
Mm.
Wherein when you're traveling, the first thing you come across a great picture or a great scenery, and you're pulling out your phone and trying to capture it rather than actually enjoying that life or
Yeah.
enjoying that moment. And
Living in
I
the moment.
recall, once I was traveling in Himachal, and this is pre-smartphone days.
Mhm.
And one of my colleagues said we were traveling towards Khajiyar, and one of my colleagues said, after this bend is paradise.
Mhm.
And I smiled at him, and we took that turn and we stopped the car and we looked down into that valley. It actually gave you that sense of paradise. Now
Beautiful.
that image is forever etched in my mind,
Mm.
and uh, and on a completely different note. Uh, I mean, I had done this. I shouldn't have done it, but I did it. Maybe I was just too compelled to do it. I was in a restaurant, and I found on the next table there was a family of two kids, their parents, and the grandparents. So all six of them sitting over there. The two kids in their phones,
I was
the
thinking that
parents with their phones, and the grandfather and grandmother, sitting and just looking at them.
so typical of a timeout, right?
Yeah, and I don't know how it happened, or in that spur of the moment, and I just got up and I walked up to the gentleman, the father of the kids, and I said, "Can I say something if you don't mind?" And he says, "Yeah, please tell me." So I said, uh, "Your kids are going to have some time with you, but your time with your parents might be limited to a few thousand weekends. And why don't you spend it with them? The phone
Mhm.
is going to be with you forever."
Yeah.
And they kind of immediately realized. I'm happy that the person didn't kind of shout back at me
Yeah.
or tell me that, why did you interfere in my life? But
That's,
I'm
yeah.
thankful to him for not having reacted that way. But,
Right.
they all of them kind of just put away their phones. And, 15 minutes later, the kind of banter which was happening on the table was a very happy moment for me also.
Lovely. Lovely. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, while it's done so much for us, it's also taken away. And I think it's really for us to realize what balance to strike with this
yeah,
extremely
we need to
powerful.
draw our own boundaries on that.
Very true. Very true. Right. Now, as we come to a close, just maybe a couple of last questions. There's one question here from Lavanya, and she said, like, how has your leadership style changed through the experiences you've had in your career? I'm sure you've changed as a person, in the early part to now. And for example, you talked about spending time with family. You talked about, Reliance's focus on health, and So it would be great to kind of, really hear from you as to how you think your priorities have changed over the years.
Yes, yeah, I would say, one is because of the whole changing environment.
Mhm.
If you have to catch up, if you have to keep pace with that, uh, your leadership style changes. I mean, you become more data driven. You become more. Uh, you're able to take decisions more on data rather than on emotions or feelings or gut feel.
Right.
It's because data always gives you a story. It always speaking something to you. The other is that you have younger people now who bring so much of knowledge to the table. I mean, I've fortunately had this one. Uh, I've been blessed with ability to learn from everybody, and so while I learn from my seniors, I learn from my peers. I learn a lot from people who are junior to me. And I'm not talking about designation. I'm talking about age also. Because
Yeah,
they bring so much of knowledge and
that's
so much
true.
of passion and so much of energy to the table. So, and this is something which has been constant with me, but in this age becomes even more relevant because in terms of technology, in terms of data, in terms of what is happening in the environment, so many of them are more knowledgeable about these things. So it's a delight to be able to learn from them. And it's not about giving directions, but it is about participating in a decision making process with them. So I think that over a period of time has become pretty delightful for me, and it's that is something which changes with time. You are uh, you're 24/7 connected now, so uh, you need to be able to get time or make time for yourselves. So it's not going to be coming automatically to you. So you've got to be finding time for yourself. So yeah, so lot of changes have happened over the last, 3 or 4 decades now, 4 decades that I've been working.
Lovely. And the final question, really, Sunil, is if a 20-year-old Sunil Dutt were to meet you today, what
Mm-hmm.
advice would you give him?
Oh well, some of the things would remain the same, and some messages won't be different from what I do now.
Right,
Uh,
right,
Mainly, it would be one, keep learning, keep your
right,
mind always open, your mind, your ears, your eyes always open, and
right.
keep learning from everybody. As I said, stay grounded, stay humble. Don't let success make you arrogant or make you cynical, either which way. So if you get kicked in your teeth, don't become cynical. Take it as a learning moment. And I have done that in my life. It's not that I never got kicked in my teeth. I did, but I chose not to become cynical. I chose to learn from it. Uh, Pursue your passions and be passionate about everything, not just about your work, but in everything that you do. Be passionate about, if you're not married, be passionate about your girlfriend or boyfriend. Be passionate about your partners. Be passionate about your friends. Be passionate about your work. Be passionate about your entertainment, travels, experiences, everything. So be passionate in everything that you do. Uh, Worry less. Enjoy the journey, and maybe learn golf a little earlier in your life. uh, yeah. So, but yes, a lot would be the same as what I do now. Uh, However, uh, be quick on learning, and for anybody, not just a younger Sunil Dutt, but for everybody, uh, become friendly with technology, because that's going to be future, and that's going to influence the future a lot.
Lovely. So, be always learning oriented, have a growth mindset, be passionate, be human and enjoy the journey, right? I think in that
Yeah.
sense. Lovely. I mean, Sunil, thank you so much. It was a wonderful, I mean, the hour just flew by. Thanks so much for your time. I really enjoyed the session, and I'm sure all the people who kind of tuned in today would have really enjoyed this, and I'm sure they'll enjoy the recording as it comes out. Thank you so much for giving us the time today.
Thank you, Vivek. It's been a pleasure, really. Thank you.
Yeah. Likewise, and would love to catch up with you sometime, in person. Would love to just, take this conversation further sometime. Yeah.
Look forward to it. Look forward to it, Vivek.
All right. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Have a great day.
Okay. All
Bye-bye.
right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.